In the last 10 years, we've seen a large increase in the number of children and young people labelled with ADHD. We've seen a 700% increase in the prescription of stimulants in medication. That is just in the UK. A 700%. What's happened? Why have we suddenly gone down this road? Talk about the notion of inclusion. A word that is just slips off the tongue, particularly in education, from kindergarten through to higher education. We talk about inclusive systems. Education must be inclusive. And I want to talk about what do we actually mean by inclusive education? What is it to be included? I want to talk briefly about the challenge of identification, which will probably be the most controversial area, and I've got some concluding thoughts. I rarely get a hand up. I did on one occasion, and the person turned out to be a child psychiatrist. I leave you to work out the issues that I had there. But the point I want to make at this point is that we had a notion of what was normal, and normal was quite broad. In fact, statistically, we drew on things like the bell curve. Oh, I never knew it. Yeah. We drew on things like the bell curve. So we were talking about children who were down here. And between there and there, you were very normal, and between there and there, you're quite normal. And between here, we didn't want to know about you because you were too bright. It's still the case in the UK where if you have children who you in Canada, I think, call exceptional or exceptionality, very bright children, they will not be regarded as having a special educational need. But it was basically 2%. Yeah? You're all familiar with that sort of statistic. People are nodding, so I'll move on. So, by DSM-5, we have 374 categories, and it's just covering behavioural stuff. Anybody find sleeping difficult? Read DSM-5. You won't go to sleep at all because you'll come out having diagnosed yourself as having at least 12 different disorders. Yeah? I started with one category, maladjusted. That would now be covered by 374 different categories. What has happened? Why have we gone down that route? Not only that, but in recent papers, in relation to ADHD, we're having authoritative statements saying there are 5% of children who've got ADHD. And I'm thinking, if you add the 5% who've got ADHD to the 5% who've got ODD, to the 15% who've got autistic spectrum, to the 10% who've got Tourette's, to the... and you keep adding those percentages up, you don't have any normal children anymore. And in fact, there's a guy called Diller, has written a wonderful book. He's a child psychologist and a psychiatrist, called The Last Normal Child. And I actually do worry that by the time I fully retire, will there be any normal children left? How do you look at normality? And at what point do you begin to say, this is not normal? Because by implication, if nothing else, at the moment I'm saying we've gone too far. Because what's happened now is that inclusion means including those with a category. I just find that amazing. I'm being inclusive if I've got people with a category in my group. I don't actually know whether I've got people with a category in my group. But that is one of the criteria for being an inclusive educational institution. It's categorically based. It's not people-based. Not only that, but now if you think you've got an issue, you've got some sort of difficulty, you can only go and see a neurologist. A neurologist, a scientificologist, a theologist, or some sort of ologist, before you can deal with the difficulty. You need a piece of paper which says, I have been to see an ologist, and the ologist says, I am whatever you've got the ologist to say. And then something can happen. What's going wrong? Why aren't we dealing with people as people? It's increasingly likely that we'll have more children and young people with categories than without them. Can you just imagine that one? It's almost as bad as when one of our politicians in the UK stood up in the Houses of Parliament at the introduction of a national curriculum. And he said, by the time all the children have got through the national curriculum that we are introducing, all children will be above average. The mathematicians amongst you just... Average. If you walk on above average, average shifts. It doesn't just worry me on a philosophical sense, it worries me on a professional sense. What am I grappling with here? So let's just quickly talk about inclusion. The cynic's view. Why are we talking about inclusion? Well, because the United Nations have written statements and we've all signed up to it, the Canadian government signed up to it, the UK government signed up to it reluctantly, but eventually did, and the Indian government signed up to it, and we're meant to be inclusive. I include, you include, we all included. Amen. And every 5 years we're judged by a big form. I don't know whether you know this, but every 5 years UNESCO asks the Canadian government to fill in a big form about its inclusion programme for all children, and they have to fill it in and show that they have included all children in education, regardless of height, weight, gender, disability, whatever, you're included, right? And you get a score, and you know, you want to be one of the top ones, so they fill it in fairly generously. So maybe the cynic in me says, you know, that's and the idealist in me says, actually it's a human right. Actually it's about humanness. Actually it's about ascribing dignity to those we engage with. Actually it's about saying you're worth something. Unfortunately, inclusion is often spoken of, but seldom defined. Frederick was kind enough to say I've written quite a bit, and some of what I've written is about the inclusion issues. And I found when I look back on what I've written, and when I looked at what other people have written, we were using the word inclusion without ever once stopping to really define what we meant by it. Quite shocked, you know? I had stuff published, it said inclusion. But we all could, you know, in an audience like this, we would all use the word inclusion, wouldn't we? And we'd all nod sagely. But you could always decline it. I include, you include, we all included. Amen. But what is it? Well, when I started to unpack it, I found there was a whole political dimension, which I'm not going to go into because time is pressing. There's a whole place issue. The most common definition of inclusion is that it's a place. It's where you are. And I can understand that a bit in terms of UK history, because we segregated lots and lots of children. So now they're saying it's mainstream, or you use the term regular in Canada like they do in the States. It's a mainstream place. So every child must be in a mainstream place. I want to look at that in a little more detail in a minute. It's a process or a system. We have educational systems which are inclusive. I just dropped this as a phrase. No system and no process can actually achieve inclusion. It doesn't do it. The reasons will become apparent in a moment. And then there's inclusion of principle, the way in which governments sign up to statements like the Salamanca Statement or the Yonkian Statement or any other statement about inclusion. All children will be included in a regular school, blah, 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 and they sign up on that. Well, let's just quickly look at inclusion of a place. Now, we're some way into the lecture, so I have to sort of regain your attention and engagement. And those of you sat on the floor might not be able to see this one, but I want you to keep your eye on the diagram, the little cartoon there, which is, by most people's reckoning, if inclusion is beneficial. Well, you can trawl the research evidence, and there's hardly any evidence at all that supports placing children with disabilities in mainstream schools is a good thing. Before any of you rejoice or weep buckets, there is hardly any evidence at all that placing children in a segregated provision works and is of benefit. We are actually woefully short of research evidence, particularly hard research evidence. Secondly, as my good friend G. Royale from McGill University wrote, we adopt a one-size-fits-all type approach. If every child should be in this sort of a place, then every child has got to fit that sort of a place. That means for me that what we've got to do is integrate, get them equipped, make them say yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir at the right time, pick up their pens and their pencils and do things in the right way. We train them. And if you want me to do that, then it's dead easy to do. All you need is a 9-volt cattle brother. You know? An intellectual event between people who value each other. It's about a value. It's about the ascription of dignity, worth. Yes, it is underpinned by principle before anybody wants to jump in. And it is an entitlement to an entitlement. But it's achieved by the process of being included. That's the key. Now, to just remind you, because you'll probably think, a long way from the title of the lecture, John, how does that apply to ADHD? If you have a label, like ADHD, or any other label for that matter, I'm just using ADHD as an example. Where is it? Where does that sit? How does that sit with you and the values and everything else? An identification is essentially a negative process. We are trying to determine what you can't do. So if you look at the 374 categories in DSM-5, or you look at the categories that you get in ICD-10, or any other form of sets of criteria, they are descriptions largely of what children cannot do. They may be described in children in terms of what they are doing, i.e. he never sits still, he fidgets for the last 6 months, he's been a pain in the arse, boom, 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 boom. There may be those sort of criteria, but essentially they are about what the child cannot do. They're negative in orientation. So, major study was declared that Rathlyn, the medicalisation was effective after 3 months of being on medication. Nobody stopped to ask the children in that study. Their criteria for success were parent and teacher responses. And if you follow the biological determination of things, then medicine is all. Medicine is God. And boy, do I know that. When I got my PhD, I was very proud. Boy from the slums, PhD. Have you had a headache because you didn't take aspirin or the chemicals that are in aspirin? Because that's partially the logic that happens when people say, you've got ADHD, I'm giving you Ritalin, your behaviour changes, therefore it must have been something the Ritalin has done that has made you change your behaviour. So you are lacking in something. And just challenge that. We are narrowing the normal. As we slice and slice and refine and refine and refine categories, particularly in my field in the area of children's behaviour issues. And we're losing sight of things and all, such that I now get asked to come and see nursery classes. They said children who are 4 and 5. And the teacher will come to them and say, Johnny, he must be ADHD. And I said, pardon? And I said, yeah, he never sits still, he's running around and everything. Have any of you ever had a 4 or 5-year-old who sits still all the time? You know? I'm scratching my head a bit. Or 2 and 3-year-olds are being determined to have ADHD because they get so frustrated that they let loose with an anger burst of such magnitude that people think, they're not in control. Well, I can tell you, I'm 67, I'm not in control either. You know? See me on a bad day, I'll be ADHD. Absolutely. And we're playing God. Now, I am a bit against time. I just want to share with you 2 thoughts. One concerns Mozart, and one concerns Churchill. One of the things that academics do when they're absolutely bored at coffee time is they Google stuff. And I was absolutely shattered by the response that came up on the screen, because there are lists and lists. And anybody who's famous who's not had ADHD is an exception. But amongst them I found Churchill and Mozart. Now can you just imagine this? I'm a teacher in a class, Mozart's in my class. Yeah? And it's our class turn to lead the school assembly later in the week. And Mozart comes bursting in on Monday morning. Sir, Mozart, sit down. Sir, Mozart, get your book out. Sir, Mozart, what is it? Is it our turn to do the assembly this week? Yes, Mozart, get on with your work. Sir, Mozart, what's the problem? Sir, I've got something we can do on Thursday. I'm working on it, Mozart, just sit still. Sir, Mozart, okay, tell me, what's the problem? I've got a C minor maths we could use, sir. Mozart, did you take your Ritalin this morning? You all smile, but think about it. What are we actually doing? And I'll tell you a story against myself. We were running a fairly large conference in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, or Czech Republic as it then was, just after the whole of the Eastern European side of things was collapsing and communism was disappearing and another form of Stasi was coming in. And my friend and I were running this conference. It's slightly ad hoc, I have to admit, because he came to me on a Wednesday morning, and he said, John, we're stuck for an after dinner speaker, would you do something? So I said, yes, okay. Now bear in mind that at this conference we had people from every European country going, including Germans. Okay? And I know I have a German in the audience, so I've got to be very careful now. And so I said, yes, that's okay. So we had dinner, and after dinner we came to a room not unlike this one, except it was banked up. And in the front sat all my German colleagues. Okay? And I'm talking about ADHD. And I just said this. Just imagine, Winston Churchill had been diagnosed as having ADHD, because it's up there on the screen in Google that he was ADHD. I said, just imagine if we'd had Ritalin and we'd given it to him We wouldn't have won the war. There's this deathly hush, and then the Germans all fed them out. But it raises a point, doesn't it? Eh? What are we actually doing? We need to research more holistically. We need to look at people and their behaviour in the round. And crucially, we need to involve the person. It is still true in many, many cases, particularly with children and young adults, up to the age of 13, 14, 15 even, that they are not involved in the process of trying to understand their behaviour and arrive at a conclusion which says you're ADHD. The study we did of 17, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, not one of them had been asked their view. They'd just been hiked along. They weren't saints, let's not kid ourselves, but they'd never been asked, never been involved. They were being done onto rather than to be worked with. The question we need to ask in research terms is, why does what work? And ask it in a holistic sense. Because if I'm right about inclusion, it has to be something about the nature of the context in which interactions take place. And the way in which we engage with each other. And I'm not saying there are simple answers here, or even simple questions. I'm saying there are questions which very often in research terms we don't answer. And we've got to stop worrying about difference and start celebrating diversity. Because if we continue to get our heads around difference, we will continue to slice things off that bell curve. We'll move further and further and further towards the middle. As we say, you're different, you're this bit. You're different, you're that bit. You're different, you're that bit. And we will move more and more. So we get narrower and narrower and narrower. I'm going to share with you DSM 6. You don't know that that's being worked on yet, so this is top secret stuff. We need to celebrate diversity. And yes, that does mean we need to have greater understanding. It does mean more tolerance. It does mean we've got to think of different ways in which we interact with each other. And in a university like this one, with Frederick and his department, looking at different ways in which we learn. Because we don't all learn in the same way. And actually, society doesn't want us to learn all in the same way. It needs its Mozarts. It needs its Churchills. It needs its people who challenge the system. That could be a good definition of ADHD, by the way. We need to involve the voice of the learner. So is being labelled ADHD useful? Not if the system has people in it whose interaction events make you feel included regardless of who you are. That is not, by the way, to negate that some of us do have some very troubling behaviours and thoughts that we grapple with, that we need help with. And sometimes that may mean some form of medication for some time. But it is to say that I think we've gone too far down the road in labelling people. We've moved away from what are really problems to what I call almost our pseudo problems, which are resolvable in normal interactions between human beings. If we don't do that, if we don't label, you might not get the resources and special attention, but not, if not, then you get labelled, and then you might get the resources and special attention, but beyond that, not much will alter. You will not alter, you will not be included unless we find ways of getting people to interact with each other. And both of those things can be taken away or be valued, resources and special attention. It only takes another financial crisis and we can wipe Frederick's department out. We can't afford to widen the doors so that wheelchairs can get through. We can't afford to make sure that people who find learning and writing dyslexics have laptops. All that can be taken away. What you can't take away is how you and I interact with each other. That's the key. So I don't mind with you sat there saying, but John, I've got ADHD, so I've got one leg shorter than the other. We all have differences. Let's communicate about those. If you are going to be reduced to putting people in categories, and you think that the last hour has been a complete and absolute waste of your time because John's wrong, then here's the bit that will really switch you on. Alright? DSM-6 will start to be planned over the next, I think the next 18 months, are getting the committees together. It'll be 5 or 6 years in the making. But we'll have a new category for DSM-6. It's got to start with DIS, because that makes it, you know, sound good. Because there's a whole lot of DISs already, aren't there? Like dyspepsia, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dysphasia. What's the next DIS? Well, here it is, folks. This is top secret stuff. If you want to start getting into a consultancy, just say that you can therapize on dysplectographia. You want to know what it is?
Yeah.
You've all got it. If Frederick and I could sit down and find a way of dealing with it and sympathising with you and running a program for you, we would retire within 6 months because you'd be beating a path to our door. It's the inability to hit the right key on the keyboard and understand the bland sayings of world computer speak, coupled with an ability to lose a file without having speak. Colleagues, I've enjoyed myself for the last hour, so if I've done nothing else but make you think, I feel I've done something worthwhile. Thank you very much.